I would now like to go to Kazi, last but not least. Kazi, you've been doing some very interesting work at iDE. iDE works with entrepreneurs, and you've really developed some very interesting tools around measuring market system resilience, or measuring resilience at the systems level within markets, and some very sophisticated tools. At the same time, you've been working with human design-centered approaches, which are more qualitative in nature, really to understand community needs and to tailor your products to community needs. So you've been working with quite different frameworks, and I'd really like to understand, and for you to give us a sense of what your learning has been around working with such different frameworks and the trade-offs of that, the potential opportunities. So just give us a sense of what that looks like.
Thank you, Lisa. So, Market Systems Resilience Index, or MSRI, iDE have been developing it since 2018. So, how do we define market? So, to us, market is in an agriculture systems where households and input suppliers and also the output growers all interact into the market space. Now, as a market systems development based NGO, we have to understand what is the resilience level of that market, and that's where that MSRI framework or tool came into action. And since we have been rolling it out in 8 countries across Asia, Africa, and South America, we have learned to iterate it in such a way that it have become sophisticated enough to give us enough information about diversity, inclusiveness of the market. But at the same time, we understood that communities have their own needs, own aspirations. iDE, since its inception, have been working on that ethos that if you, our founder have this great quote that if you haven't spoken to more than 100 customers into certain level of depth, don't even think about intervening. So on that aspect, we have been iterating on different markets on human-centered design. That is an approach of not only learning by asking questions, but by also observing different types of dynamics from active participant observation. So now that quantitative methods of MSRI that have been developed, and how do we bring up that more participant observation, one-to-one interviews, and try to amalgamate that together so that we can have a holistic picture of the market, so that the kind of interventions and activities we want to do with the community actually brings together the aspiration and demand from the community. So that is where we have been working since last year in 3 countries in Africa, Zambia, Ghana, and in Ethiopia. And one of the things we try to prioritize is to looking into creating that connection with the community. And that started with language. For example, when we went to the southeast region of Ethiopia, our translator and our researchers were all wanted to talk in Oromo language with them or communicate to a certain extent, or in northern Ghana in Dagbani language. So this creation of long-term understanding and being with the community to observe the power dynamics, gender norms, or the way that different other social aspects work on, help us create that trust. And when we try to communicate that MSRI findings with them, for example, what did we learn from these 3 countries? We learned that market actors, let's say input sellers or output market actors, they actually do not cater specifically to women or poorer households. So they're more of kind of on a very over the top kind of selling methods. So that means that disenfranchise these people who need the better inputs more. And when we went to the community who are marginalized smallholder farmers and particularly women farmers, we got to know from them that like the land they have is very scarce. So it's not that they have particular crops for like, for household consumption or particular crops or livestock for like, selling. It's like, they try to mitigate and manage based on different like aspects and economy of that particular situation. So as they move forward with those sort of activities, they want to have better access to like better inputs so that they can grow more. But there is always a affordability gap, and also like, not having those inputs in sufficient quantity. So as such, what we, in such, so we see that there is a gap between what producers want or community want as farmers and what the market or market actors able to provide it to them. And on to the secondary level, what we understood about like, like gender dynamics of the yes, households tend to like, male and female partners have tried to talk about different agriculture problems and things. But when it comes to decision of spending, that actually have certain embedded gender role that's like, very hard to broker into. And the other thing is we have learned that the output markets, people who try to sell, purchase goods or agriculture produce, they also want to buy directly from the farmers, but they cannot because there is already a strong like linkages of middlemen. Interestingly, women, they do not want to sell goods to these middlemen. They want to sell directly to the consumers because that way they can get most of the profits. But to certain extent, their monthly expenditure have a big amount of like money that's spent on like, for their transporting their goods to those consumer markets. And different situations, they actually can't really go and sell those produce they actually want to sell to different markets that can give them better return for the investment of time and resources they are doing. So that understanding of translating those data of quantitative data that we have learned from Market Systems Resilience Index and what we found from human-centered design observation help us understand that their financial need and the market linkages need can be met through creating social groups. That is a common way. But what we also try to do is to bring on MFI and other actors, both from government and non-government, to create a market ecosystems around these women entrepreneurs and farmers. And we are hoping that next year when we do that, we will see a jump into those indicators that will help us understand whether our work had impact onto those people's life.
Thank you, Kazi. Also another powerful example of how we can start to find common ground.
Thank you. So to start with, how do we make a homogeneous market systems to specify different actors or different types of interest groups? So we do that in iDE by looking into the value chains. So let's say there are 10 types of crops that are grown in an area, and we try to identify with the community and with agriculture extension agents of the government, what are the most predominant livelihood generating crop or livestock value chain. And then we try to identify by talking with who are the input side of these actor and who are the output side. Let's say in cattle or livestock, if someone people who sell vaccine, who sell feed, these are the input markets, whereas the output markets are the middlemen who buys those cattle and sell it to the city or other areas. So we try to talk with each of these people and then try to understand their motivation, their interest, and their problems, and that's how we try to cater to the question. Coming to your how do we disaggregate the indicators? So in Market Systems Resilience Index, we have 11 indicators and 5 principles. So the 5 principles are broken down into that 11 indicators. So let's say diversity. So diversity, inclusion, and also integration, they are all like, grouped together, and they all have equal weight, and that are going to aggregate into like principle of like, that particular, let's say, preparedness. And in that same way, like, preparedness, financial, environmental, each are like, segmented into different, like, different aspects, and each have different level of question that help us, like, generate score for each of those areas. Coming to the adoption part, so far, MSRI, we have done it as an iDE, as an organization, and we have been talking with different other partners so that they come and adopt this framework. So we have a lot of learning from our, like, scaling it up in 8 countries. But one of the pertinent of adoption is that like, people like accept the findings, but what we are going to do about to improve those kinds of things, that have various ways of looking into things. But as projects are like, certain amount of time bound, that is where, and also budget bound, that's where we stumble upon onto different like, priorities. But as we go towards, like, working and learning more, we feel that like we will be able to fill that void of adoption, and like, actually partnership with other organization helps us, like, not trying to create a lot of framework, but improve one framework in such a way that, like, that becomes industry benchmark. Coming to the lady from Goal, her question, conflict is a very, like, like never escaping like, condition in many of, like, countries where iDE works on. For example, Mozambique, in northern area, in Cabo Delgado where we work, Islamic insurgency, like, chase our staff on frequent level. But that's the reality. As much as climate change, like, there are, like, every year there would be like cyclones or like heavy rain downpour, but people actually fear more about those conflict situations, and women are always afraid of, like, many of the situations that, like, abhorrent in this century. As such, market actors and market players, private sector, do not want to go and work into those communities to build the supply chain because of that fear factor. There are things that are out of our control, and we can only, like, work into the fringes of what is best for those communities, but not really go into deep as much as we want to, because of fear of our own lives and lives of the community itself. So these are, like, very much overarching, systematic, and by, like, kind of unfortunate circumstances. And other than, like, trying to mediate and resolve with wider community, we are kind of helpless.